Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next installment of The Curse of Strahd, A Cleric's Tale. We're going to see a little bit of action as well as an introduction of some new and important characters. I would say that if you haven't heard the rest of the story until this point, I invite you to go back and give it a listen. But also, I think that this is a singular chapter because if you wanted, you could start here. Most people, when they play this game, skip Death House, mostly because of its brutality, content, and the fact that most characters die. Um, in fact, when we played the campaign, all of us would have died if it wasn't for Chad, who plays Gunner, with his brilliant idea to calm the baby. So, you can start here. As always, I would like to thank you for listening and supporting my little project. It's not much, but it's something I really enjoy doing. I know my accents are bad, but that's why I'm here, to practice my storytelling. I lied to you earlier. I said I didn't plan on making money off of this, and that's still true. I mean, I'm not supported by Wizards of the Coast, nor will I ever be. But it would be great if I was. I love you, Wizards of the Coast. But this is part of my creative company that I co-own with Courtney called Wayfinder Threads. We're starting up new projects, and I would love it if you clicked on the link below to visit our Patreon and consider a monthly subscription. If you do, we'll be able to do other things, have better equipment, maybe pay somebody to do music and sound effects on this. And there will be rewards of special podcasts and readings from some of the other players. If you're listening, that means you guys and Game Night. I would really like to write a script and you guys read through it, and just have that for our subscribers only. As always, this is a very brutal campaign. If you do not like violence, if you do not like child violence, if you do not like the talk of suicide, please refrain. All right. Enough talk. It's time to explore. Chapter 4. Friendly Goodbyes and Dark Greetings. We walked through the gates and through the mist onto a road that was deeply worn by tracks as it curved around the border of the forest. It had ancient trees that were gnarled and soaked with the mist that seemed to never really disperse. It was around this time, walking between Cassius and Othrot, that I realized I hadn't seen the sun since we were separated. And though that was only a day ago, the experience in the house made it feel like years. The wagons, horses, and all our supplies had disappeared when the fog had come, and though we knew we needed them, we each knew that it would be a vain attempt in looking for them. I had never known a forest to be anything but a collection of trees, streams, and rocks. But this one, the old Svalage forest we would learn that it was called, seemed to harbor a malevolence that gave me the impression that I didn't want to cross the border. I believed that if I did, I wouldn't be coming back. Though we could not see the sun for the thick mist, we traveled most of the day and until the evening until we heard, coming from the head off to the side, some upbeat music. As we came closer, we could see a set of covered wagons that had been pulled into the clearing, and there was in the middle a mass bonfire that men and women clothed in patchwork fabric danced and drank around in no real pattern or reason. To me, it looked like a group of people that were having a wonderful time. The things we had been through made us a little apprehensive to approach them, and that's when Gunnar came forward, put his hand on my shoulder, and pointed at our own wagons and horses tucked between the others. Everything looked intact. "We need to get those back, bruv. Or at least, I need my handcart," he mumbled. I knew that he had a strong attachment to his handcart, though I wasn't sure why, and if we didn't try to get our things back together, he was definitely going to try himself. We had, in my mind, two choices. We could go into the camp and ask for our things, and if they denied us, we would demand our things, or we would go in with our weapons brandished to scare them off. Although they looked harmless, there was no telling what a troop would be carrying to defend themselves. "I think we should introduce ourselves," Cassius said. "I'll do the talking." We tried to make ourselves look as presentable as possible and approached the camp as loud as and openly as we could. I had learned in my many years of traveling that most of the time, those camping knew you were close to them before you were aware that they were there. This time, it was the same. An older man with gray hair and deep wrinkles stood up from an upturned crate and greeted us. He told us that his name was Stanimir, and we were welcome to his camp. When we told him that he had our wagons and supplies, I didn't know what to expect, but he didn't even turn to look. Instead, he held up his wooden mug, smiled, and simply said, "You finally made it." We followed him to the fire where the others greeted us, as if we had been long-lost friends back from a long journey. Gunnar rushed to his handcart and checked it over. The look on his face was split between worry and sadness. Cassius inspected the cart, checked the supplies, and then nodded to himself as he took a seat near the fire. We got our own mugs from our travel gear and watched in anticipation while Stanimir poured us a drink from a wine glass that had a roaring dragon's head as the opening. We found out this was made also by the same place or same group of people called the Wizards of Wine, and that the drink itself was called Red Dragon Crush. It wasn't like the wine we had before, but it still tasted better than anything that I'd ever drank in a long time. After introducing ourselves, we asked about Wizards of Wine and found that it had only been the place that served wine in all of Barovia. I looked over at the lass and Cassius. I could see that she was enjoying the drink. The light caught Cassius's eyes, and I could see that he was thinking the same thing, that there was a possibility. If we worked it right, we could make a little money on our own drink. "I don't mean to be rude," Othroth spoke, "but who are you?" Stanimir held out his hands, and the music died down. The people stopped dancing, and the children that had fought sleep settled against their parents' legs. There was more wine poured, and silence took over while the old man stared into the fire, revisiting whatever old men visit before they tell a story. They were known as the Vistani. Stanimir explained that once, a very long time ago, the Vistani people had a homeland like everyone else, but they lost it. He didn't expand on it. The sadness that came across his face made me long for my own home, and it didn't matter of when and why that his people had lost it. He was like me, without a real place, and for once I felt that I was in good company. Barovia, he warned us, wasn't going to be friendly. He meant the land as well as the people, that most of the inhabitants didn't like outsiders, including the Vistani. Long ago, the prince of the land, Stanimir explained, had fallen. He was betrayed by his allies and would have died if it wasn't for the Vistani that took him in and allowed for his wounds to heal. After a time with them, he gained enough strength to return to a seat of power and destroy his enemies. Since that day, the Visanis have had special treatment in the kingdom. From what I can gather, they traveled through Barovia unheeded. Cassius asked what Stanimir meant, but the old man wouldn't speak on it much. He said the land itself wouldn't turn against them like it would us. There was a deep pause before he said, "He is the ancient. He is the land." The prince had saved them from the same figure that was in the basement of the Durst Manor. How could someone be evil and good at the same time? Or maybe the Vistani were in league with the individual as well, but I doubted it. Looking how safe and happy the children were as they slumbered on their parents' laps told me that they did not fear for their lives. "I'm sorry," Othroth said. "But are you good or bad?" "Neither," Stanimir replied. "We are like most here. We are surviving." After the story, I figured most people would leave and go to bed. But more drinks were poured, and the music started back up. Stanimir drank and shook people's hands. Some of them shed a few tears, while others shared a secret smile which told me there was something more to this group than met the eye. But I wasn't about to push it. Not until they had a little more drink in them, at least. Instead, I learned more about their people. It turned out the Vistani travel freely through Barovia, but they don't call any township home. They have camps that were placed through the land that were permanent enough, but if they wanted to, they could leave when they needed. But as the Red Dragon Crush flowed, and we became friends with one another, Stanimir admitted that he knew he would meet us on the road, that he was told by the so-called leader of the Vistani. She was one with what they called the Sight, and she was prophesied our coming into the lands. We were all paying attention then. I didn't believe that people could see the future, but this person did seem to be a resource that may be able to help us. He told us her name was Madame Ava. Her camp was at the Sir Pool, west of the town named after the realm, Barovia. When we pressed for any other information, he took a long drink, stood up in front of the fire. The shadows flickered over his body, and at that moment he looked older than he had the entire night. He told us that there were two people that might come across that would be respectful toward if we found them. The first, he said, would be found in the township of Barovia named Bildergrass, the shop owner. The other, he shared a smile with everyone around us, was a woman named Jenny Greenteeth. That if she wanted to trade with us, she'd find us and let us know. After that, he started to walk off into the dark. The laughter stopped and everyone stood and held their drinks towards his back as he made his way to his wagon. Talking to a few of the others, we learned that Stanimir was dying, that this was his last full night in the land of the living, and his wish was to die outside the realm of Barovia. Lucky, they said, that they were the only ones to leave when they wanted to. The mist would part for them. If we knew what was waiting for us, which one of us would have taken that ride with the Vistani that night? Which one of us would have followed Stanimir to whatever death was waiting him in the coming day? I cannot say that I would have. For this land without the light from the Allfather, there was nothing here but darkness and hopelessness. I'm an old dwarf, and I'd grown tired of fighting the good fight a long time ago. Or at least that's what I thought. But that wasn't it at all. I had just been sleeping. I was destined to come to this place and strike the cold anvil of justice and purity. Spark the flames of rebellion against this cursed prince, as they called him. I hope Stanimir found his peace out there in the mist. He was a kind old man, and there wasn't any telling what kind of horrors he had survived. Sometimes a man forgets himself when the horrors come knocking at their door. Thinking back on his form, being eaten up by the night back then, I could see that he walked with no fear, for he was a man that was well past anything. The next morning, if you could call it that, for there still wasn't a sun in the sky, and the mist still clung to the trees, we woke to find that the Vistani had left. There was no trace of the wagons on the ground, nor on the road in any direction. Whatever magic they had, it seemed to cover their tracks. With our belongings back, we checked on our fermenting and saw that things were going as well as they could. I shared my idea with Cassius and the lass about selling our own drinks to make a little money, and they both thought it was a good idea. We made our plans while we ate hard biscuits, fried ham, and washed it down with water. It seemed that I would do my part in making the drink while they took care of the others. I knew that there were some dwarves of Marathon that created holy mead, and I believed, if I could, I'd be able to call on the Allfather to do it myself. And if there was something evil enough here, the mead would be used for more than drink. We traveled a small, narrow path most of the day, stopping once for drink, once for a quick lunch, and allowing the horses to eat. They weren't of high quality, but they did their job, and I couldn't complain. The farther we progressed, the more the forest seemed to close in on us, and the air grew cool. We slowed as parts of the forest almost made it impossible to see, so Cassius had to light a single torch. The evening was starting to come on, and through the canopy I could see lightning illuminating the silver sky in the distance. A storm was coming our way, and if we didn't find something soon, we were in for a miserable night. We lit a few other torches and put them on the side of the wagon to ensure that we had enough light to take in our surroundings. That's when Othrot, walking alongside the wagon, gave a shout of surprise. We drew our weapons and charged forward, ready for battle. We came up onto him, and he was knelt over a body of a young man that was in the middle of decay. Mushrooms had sprouted through the thin strands of his wet black hair, and his eyes were milky white and dry. In his hands was a weatherproof case made for delivering messages over long distance. I took some time to create a cairn over his body and say a prayer in hopes that his soul would find some peace. All the while Cassius read the letter, and his face had grown very pale. When I asked what it had said, he had cleared his throat, looked at all of us, and read it aloud.
I, the Burgomaster of Barovia, send you honor with despair. My adopted daughter, The fair Irina Kolyana has been, in these past nights, bitten by a vampire. For over 400 years, this creature has drained the lifeblood of my people. Now my dear Irina languishes and dies from an unholy wound caused by this vile beast. He has become too powerful to conquer. So I say to you, give us up for dead, and encircle this land with symbols of good. Let holy men call upon their power, that the devil may be contained within the walls of the weeping Barovia. Leave our sorrows to our graves, and save the world from this evil fate of ours. There is much wealth entrapped in this community. Return for your reward after we have all departed for a better life. Signed, Kulyan.
The last checked the letter and confirmed that it was written in a different hand than the other that we had been given back in Acquisitions Incorporated. This one spoke of a sick woman, but now we knew that she was afflicted with something else. A vampire, especially one that old. It wasn't something that I had dealt with before, and the others admitted that they had very little knowledge of such creature either. I wasn't sure what everyone was feeling like going forward, but looking at the growing mist, I felt as if we didn't have a choice at this point. Instead of abandoning this land, I was going to do my best in the name of the Allfather to bring it back to light. It was my destiny. That's when the howling wind started, and the howling with it. Lancelot whined, but I patted him. The lightning had moved closer, and the rumbling thunder now told us that rain was inevitable. We all had heard the wolves before, but these sounded louder, and they continued, and on as they seemed to be getting closer. Darkness soon came, and the cold wind rode into the front of the storm, struck us. The ancient trees started whining and groaning as they moved back and forth in the wind. Leaves broke away and skirted across the pass as we moved forward. And then, without warning, the forest stopped, and the wind grew stronger. As far as we could see was rolling farmland, with leaning barns and squat houses in the far distance. The howling came from the woods to the left of us, much louder. "We can try to outrun them," Gunnar suggested. "Not with these horses," Cassius shouted over the wind. "Then we make a stand here," I said. "We've all had to fight wolves before. It's nothing else. It's nothing new." None of us knew what was coming at us in the woods. Cassius got off the wagon and gathered our torches. Othrot and Gunnar used their magics to light them so they wouldn't go out, and he circled the area as best as he could with them, and we drew our weapons and waited. The howling continued, and it seemed to overpower all of the wind. I watched as Lancelot cowered under the wagon, shaking. Though he was dead, he was still felt fear. He wasn't aware that he was dead himself. A flash of lightning illuminated the empty fields, and we caught the shapes of wolves encircling our ring of fire. I shouted for them to be ready and stepped forward, ready to give the first strike. That's when we heard the horses whinny, and I turned just in time to see one of the ponies lifted in the maws of a massive wolf that was big as our cart. It closed down on the beast, powerful jaws, and we could hear the thin ribs crack of its frail body as it went limp. It dropped the horses to show us that it was not bloodthirsty and a ravenous beast, but intelligent with the intent to kill us all. Cassius shouted as he knocked away a normal-sized wolf, sending its body careening over the torches and back into the darkness where its pack waited to tear us apart. And then another massive wolf appeared, both black as the night as they came from. They easily stepped over the torches, and the light caught their red eyes. Their thick fur caught in the wind as they stalked toward us. "Cassius!" I shouted as they traveled forward. One wolf lunged for Othrot, but I deflected it with my shield. The power of the beast sent me stumbling back, and I was barely able to attack one of the smaller wolves that had snuck in. I smashed its skull from the top, the brains exploding out of its eye sockets, and it let out a whimper before falling limp on the ground.
"These are dire wolves,"
Othrot shouted, throwing a fireball into the side of one of them.
"I've read about them in my books."
"Not helpful," Cassius grunted as he struck the same with the side of his hammer. His blow and the magic fireball would have killed a normal wolf, and though it was damaged this dire wolf, it did not stop it from attacking. It bit down on Cassius, and the last ran in driving a fist on the side of its temple, but it wasn't enough. Cassius shouted even more as the fireball struck the sides of it. "Get it off me!" I ran forward and slammed my shit into the side of its head, and struck its underbelly with my mace. We did enough damage that it released Cassius and turned on the lass. She was quick, but it bit into her, and she was bleeding from multiple wounds from her ribs. Cassius was favoring his right side, but both of them deflected its snapping jaws and sharp claws. The other dire wolf had circled around and killed another horse. All that was left was a horse tethered to the wagon. The wind was pushing against us hard, and the torches were starting to hiss while the heavy raindrops pelted the dark landscape. The thunder was so loud it sounded like the sky above us had split open. I lodged a shield in the dire wolf's mouth, and it started to fling me, but the lass slid under and slammed her palm upward while Cassius brought the full might of his hammer down. I could feel the sharp teeth sink into the wood of my shield as the bones of the beast gave way, and finally the blood poured from its mouth and coated my forearm with hot liquid. The monster lumbered sideways and then fell dead to the ground. Wasting no time, we shouted above the wind and charged to the front of the cart. Seeing its companion dead, the remaining direwolf threw its head back and let out a deep howl before leaping over us, scooping up one of the dead horses and disappearing into the night. The howling stopped, and we could no longer see the eyes glowing at the edge of the few remaining torches sputtering in vain against the wind and sporadic rain. I gathered the remaining torches while Cassius and Lass took some time to skin the wolf. When I asked why, he explained to us that he had never seen a creature of this size, and figured that we could sell the skin to help bolster our funds and find a way out of this horrible place. We were tired, injured, and spent. The darkness was upon us. The rain began to come at us in torrents. None of us wanted to stop. There was no telling if that beast would come back for us after it had eaten the horse. I can say, without the lie, that back then, if our direwolf, the remaining one, had attacked us, we would have not survived. We would have been devoured by a pack of wolves, and our story would have ended. But it did not. The road was slick, and the mud started sucking at our heels. Each house we passed seemed to have no lights, and we had a feeling that none of us were welcome. So we kept going, with our hoods up and weapons out. The rain pinged off our metal. The wolf's head hung off the side of the cart, and I kept staring at it any time the lightning flashed. Its broken teeth caught in the lightning. Just when I was about to give up, the road turned into cobblestone, and the water gathered between the crevices, creating pools. Ahead we could see the shapes of houses, most of them two-story, when lightning streaked across the sky. Even from the rise, I could see that they looked abandoned or in disrepair. And then I saw it. Another flash of lightning, towering above the cliff, a massive keep. I held my shield above my head to keep the rain out of my face and studied it. I could see that there were dim lights coming from the windows, but there was nothing that said there was anyone alive. We moved down into the town while the rain continued to punish us until we came to a two-story building that had a door hanging half open. A weak yellow light created a thin line on the cobblestone. A sign hung above the door. One of the chains had rusted, broke, and it swung loosely in the wind. It read, "Blood on the Vine." Gunnar chose to stay behind and cast an alarm spell on his cart while the rest of us stepped in. It was a low-ceilinged room with a barkeep and 4 women sitting at a table. I immediately went and stood in front of the fire while Cassius ordered drinks. But the bartender took the women and then told them that he wouldn't serve anything but water. When he inquired about rooms, the innkeeper known as Eric told us that there weren't any rooms to rent for the likes of us. Gunnar stepped in soaking and shivering and joined me by the fire. I told him it looked like we weren't welcome here. Cassius took a table and refused to leave. We joined him and we all sat, getting glares from the women and the barkeep. A few minutes passed, and then a gentleman walking in wearing an overcoat shook the water off. He had a large brimmed hat that he also took off, revealing shaggy black hair and a pointed nose. He had a look of worry and sorrow on his face, and it had aged him even for such a young man. No one in the end received him well, and he gruffly ordered some wine. The barkeep handed him a poor-looking bottle, and the man went to the table by himself to drink it straight. Cassius, being one of noble blood, approached him and asked who he was. The man called himself Ismark Kulyana. It was the man that first wrote the letter, and Cassius informed him of this. The women looked up and laughed, and Ismark stood from the table, told us that this company was below him, and asked us to join him in his mansion on the other side of town. We all agreed and followed him back into the rain and down the street. It was as I thought. Most of the houses had boarded windows, or the doors would be swinging back and forth in the wind. I could have sworn I heard moaning or crying from some of the houses, but with a downpour like this, it was hard to tell. Then we came upon a mansion looking worn. It was surrounded by a rusting iron fence. There were places, when we walked along, that we could see the wrought iron had been pulled apart by something. The gate was in two parts, one swinging on worn hinges, squeaking loudly as we stepped through. The other part we actually stepped on. He explained that it had been torn away by the last attack, but said nothing more. As the lightning continued, I got parts of a story all across the house. There was a flash, claw marks at the boarded windows, flash, scorched places on the walls, broken glass, metal, and wood crunched under our feet as we stopped in front of the house. He showed us a stable where we stowed our things, and then he opened the door and we rushed in. Like the Durst Manor, the place spoke of nobility and wealth, but had long fallen into disrepair. What I saw as we moved through the halls are holy symbols in every room. They were generic, but I could tell that their shapes were to invoke the thoughts of light and protection that it brings. We stepped into the study to see a woman dressed in armor holding a sword. At her neck we could see two small red marks, but I didn't bring it to anyone's attention. In the center of the room was a sturdy wooden coffin holding an old man dressed in black silk clothing. In his hand was a wooden cane. It was their father, the old Burgomeister of Barovia. The introductions were made, and Irina, the woman, was the focus of the attacks, and that they had happened every night, and the father couldn't take it anymore, and he died. When I asked who was attacking them, Ismark himself lowered his head and said, "The devil," but Irina raises her head and points toward the castle that looms over the town.
"The devil's Strahd,"
she whispers. That's when there was a knock at the door. 3 loud raps. We drew our weapons, and Irina drew her own. Ismark opened the door, with the rest of us waiting to see what was going to come and attack us. What we saw was a tall, gaunt figure with black hair oiled and slicked back. He wore a metal breastplate over an exquisite white shirt. A long black cloak hugged his frame and pulled around him at his feet. He had no weapons, just a bouquet of flowers. "I've come to apologize for killing your father," the man said. And then he looked at the lass and the flowers fell to the ground. "May I come in?" he whispered.
"No."
Irina and Ismark said at the same time. He sneered at them, showing his fanged teeth, but his face softened when he looked upon the lass again.
"Is that really you, Tatiana?"
We looked at the lass, and she seemed as confused as us.
"Come to me," he said,
holding out his hand. The lass refused, and he lowered it.
"You're new here," he said. "This woman is my Tatiana reborn. I thank you for bringing her to me."
"You're not having her," I said. "Who are you?"
"I am Count von Strahd Zarovich."
He smiled, the rainwater trailing down the center of his forehead.
"I am the ancient and the land."
All of the horrors we had seen so far had come from this man, and yet he could not step beyond the door as if some force was holding him away. I wanted nothing more than to call down the full might of the Allfather and destroy him with his holy light that filled my chest. I started to move, but Cassius' hand stayed my shoulder. "If you will not come with me now," he said, "then I invite you to my castle. All of you. He turned and walked into the rain, and we moved forward. To our shock, he climbed upon a large black steed that reared back and almost roared instead of neighing. And that's when the flames ignited at its hooves and at his eyes. Lightning struck a house not far off, sending wooden shingles into the air, and the thunder tore at their ears. The horse leapt into the air, and they were both gone into the night. We had met our adversary. We had met my destiny. My last battle with the darkness. And at that moment, as the rain pushed through the door and pulled around our feet, I wasn't sure that I was able to withstand against something so powerful, so dark. But there was something else in me, even then, a holy hate that I had never known. It was as I've been forged in the fires of Mordon for a moment, for this entity, and I would either destroy him from ever coming back, or die with his holy words upon my lips. There would be no in between.